I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, the place to learn from thought leaders in the world of wine and marketing, welcoming you to the MW Student Series. Across these 4 episodes, exploring the personal and professional experiences of 4 current MW students with the aim to shine a light on the varied roles each has within the wine industry. And in each episode, we'll also be tasting a selection of wines that have a special significance to each guest. We close out the series today in the company of wine marketing strategist Florencia Gomez. London-based Florencia hails from Argentina, has over 12 years experience at all stages of the wine supply chain, and is currently a Stage 2 MW candidate. She holds a winemaking degree and has made wine in Argentina, the US, France and Croatia, subsequently working as an export manager at Argentina's Grupo Peñaflor. Since 2019, Florencia has been a consultant using her experience to rethink wine communications from a holistic perspective, working as a brand ambassador, content creator and communication strategist. We hear her origin story and entry into the wine world before discussing Argentinian wine culture, taking a deep dive into Flor's consultancy work, before tasting 3 Argentinian wines, a Chardonnay from Buenos Aires, and a Criolla and a Cabernet Franc, both from Salta in the north. Florencia knowing each of the wineries intimately from her time at Grupo Peñaflor. Before we close out, discussing future wine trends and Florencia's experience of the Master of Wine program. Enjoy.
My name is Florencia Gomez. I am Argentinian. I started my wine path in 2008 when I started studying winemaking in Mendoza. The first years of my career, I started off in the cellar and in the lab. So very hands-off type of work. And in 2012, I did my first harvest in California. And that was kind of like my first eye-opener to like the world of wine, what it means, getting to engage with international fellows, people working with me, and to understand that wine can be consumed in different ways. So that was pretty interesting and eye-opening for me. And then I continued to work, harvest here and there. I worked a year in Croatia as an assistant winemaker. I did harvest in Burgundy. I came back to California several times. And by 2015, I realized I was really passionate into communicating and the business of wine and especially consumers and how they behave differently all around the world. So I started working for Grupo Peñaflor, that is the largest Argentinian group, as an export manager. So that was kind of really interesting for me because I came from a very technical background, chemistry, microbiology, lab, and all that. And all of a sudden I had to learn about shares and markets and how they evolve and having a budget and how to perform out of it. And it really invited me to start thinking out of the box and to be very flexible. And I learned a lot working from them. And then afterwards, I kind of started kind of like dreaming on becoming a master of wine. It started earlier, but I started like seeing it as most seriously. I started meeting master of wines and seeing how they talk and behave and think. And I was like really fascinated about that. And I started taking it more seriously and started driving my career more into the communication side of things. And I moved to London right before the lockdown, before COVID started, kind of to pursue my dream of becoming an MW. So right now I'm on stage 2 and I'm enjoying it, every piece of it. Well, not every piece of it, but most of it I really enjoy. Some parts are rather painful, but for the most part, I enjoy it enough to keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And given the number of Masters of Wine that I've had on, I can certainly relate to, I guess the enormity of the task and, having, of course, the sort of the ups and downs. And, we'll absolutely get into, I think, and focus on a little bit more in your MW journey to date. But actually, something from your story, which really, I think it intrigues me because I've not actually interviewed too many people who are originally from South America, and in your case, originally from Argentina. And I'm just curious, you kind of alluded to it a little bit there around going to California and kind of seeing this different way of enjoying wine and this kind of different culture around wine, really. So I wonder if, before we sort of, again, kind of, move the story on and up to date, maybe just reflect back on that experience and, maybe even just, start with talking a bit about the culture around wine that exists in Argentina.
Well, so I would always like to say that Argentina is kind of like a new world country, but it has a lot of like old world traditions. Most of our roots are European. So a lot of our way to behave, huge immigration from Italy and Spain. But for example, I have even Croatian roots. So the way people behave around wine and food, it's kind of like, in a way, Mediterranean. And I don't know, it used to be very simple where you would buy wine from a keg or drink it with soda or with an ice. And from like in the 70s, Argentina had like a huge consumption of wine per capita, like it was something crazy, like 80 or 90 liters of wine per capita, which was huge, but mostly was drunk like this, like very casually, easygoing wines and entry level. But then at the beginnings of the 90s, it started getting more into more premium wine, specializing, Malbec got into place, and it started becoming more into this fancier thing, more sophisticated, winemakers trying to achieve better quality with technology, and winemakers coming in. By the time I arrived to California, my view was very like narrow-minded. I only understood how we drink wine here, that young people by the time didn't drink that much. It was something our parents would do. Often consumers feel a little bit, scared about this world where you have to drink your wine in a decanter and in a fancy way with a nice glass. And that's kind of like interesting for me. And then I came to California where, I was in Napa, which is like a micro world of wine that probably doesn't count for all the states. But I saw like young people drinking and chatting and discussing their wines. And they talk about quality and styles around the world. In Argentina, we don't have imports of wine. So it was really interesting to see like different styles of wines I've heard about or I've studied about, but how they comes into play, particularly within younger consumers. I was very intrigued on that. But also, I think I got seduced a little bit about the charm of Napa and their like amazing hospitality. I've never seen anything like that. Their visit to the wineries are outstanding, crazy stuff. And I got very like amazed by all that. I was 22 the first time I went there. And then the other contrast that I make in my mind is, out of curiosity, I ended up going to Croatia and work for in my grandparents' town. I ended up working a year there. That was a pretty interesting personal experience, living in a world where like you don't understand the word what they're saying. But yes, also like the contrast of people being absolutely sustainable in their way of living and like trading with your neighbor, your olive oil and your grapes, or the relax of drinking wine with ice because it's hot in summer and that's what you do. I mean, so the contrast of understanding that there's no one way of consuming wine and that is absolutely fine. I mean, I love being in Napa in a fancy place and having all my fancy glass, like any day. I'll take it any day. But also like there are so many other ways how people relate to wine. and how, like, for example, one of the fancy things the funny things. I always keep in mind, for example, the neighbors in Croatia would come with a used Coke bottle, plastic PET bottle, and they would buy the wine from the tank. And that's how they sold the wine, It's like amazing. You get it fresh from the tank and you bring it to the table. So, very contrasting.
It's always incredible for me to just understand and unpick a little bit the culture around wine. And maybe in Argentina it was just sort of something that was just always there and always on the table, but there was this sort of maybe second wave, or there was this change where the quality got higher, and maybe that was a phase that people went through, that where it was like, let's think and maybe let's overthink about what we're having. And I just wonder if, you being, as we're speaking now back in Argentina on a visit, how is that sort of settled, would you say? Would you say that people are maybe, a little bit more relaxed about it nowadays, and maybe, maybe reflecting on, I guess, some of our broader perspectives around, Argentina, and I guess the success of Malbec really, and its success as a great meat and steak pairing wine.
Well, we'll discuss about that later, but I think that the industry, and this is kind of like general around the world, have made a great effort in communicating how special wine is and why consumers interested to learn more. But there's and I think that we are coming to a point where we are understanding it better, that there's a very fine line where we are scaring our consumers. And if you're in front of a shelf and you're overwhelmed, you might pick a beer or something that is less complicated and then go for it. Yeah. So I think that in that sense, I can see it like within my friends or in like the wine shops, labels are becoming more friendly. There are like wider range of styles. There are the classics that are going always to be the classics, but the wineries understand this. And within the Malbec success, many Argentinian wineries have come across the challenge of going out of the world and understanding what people think about us, how to communicate it. They've seen the success of it because the brand recognition of Argentina and Malbec probably 20, 30 years ago was inexistent. And today, pretty much most wine drinkers would relate to that. So I think that the work they've done is fantastic. But it's time probably to start including other stuff into that pack and thinking forward to the new consumers, because they change and have new stuff and new interest. And there's stuff like COVID and change the whole game. And, we have to be very flexible and dynamic on the way we approach wine consumers. So I think that Argentinian producers are very aware of that. Yeah.
Okay. No, it's great to feel as though we've gotten a sort of an idea, I guess, that maybe some of the broader trends, and maybe this is just sign of the times. Those broader trends are also being reflected in Argentina among wine consumers. One, I guess, part of the story, which I think will actually help me, and I think will help the listener, would be to talk a bit about your profession, really. Your consultancy and your communication agency, and maybe to reflect on, I guess, the starting of that endeavor and where it kind of is sitting and its place in the world as we kind of sit here in 2021.
Yeah, so I started after beginning of 2019. I was living in Zanzibar. We'll leave that story for another chapter, but I was living in Zanzibar back in the time.
In Zanzibar.
No, you'd be surprised. You have a lot of...
I love it.
Yes, actually, we moved to Zanzibar because my partner got a job for wine and drink distributors. So amazing team. And they have a lot of hotels and tourists coming in. So they have tons of international wines, even more than in Argentina, for example. There you have another interesting market take.
I love it, yeah. As you say, we'll save that for the next.
Where I can tell you about the consumption of hotels and Oreca, which is super interesting as well. So I started working with communication, marketing. I realized while working with Peñaflor that was like a big passion, getting to communicate and, kind of like translate all the complicated stuff about wine into a simpler language for the consumers or whoever that is on the other side to understand it better. So that was kind of the one thing that got me into it. And I started writing about wine, making some projects here and there. I worked with an app. We developed an app for the Chinese consumers. And we created kind of like a game to kind of figure out what's their taste and how to ease their choice. And then by the time I got to London, that was a couple months in between, probably 8-9 months. By the time I got to London, I arrived to London beginning of March. So COVID was non-existent,
right,
but 3 days after, it got crazy really quick. So all of a sudden I found myself with even more work because luckily there was a lot of people trying to convert digital very quickly. And they didn't know how to do it. And they understood that they need a website, or they understood that they need better technical sheets or better social media presence, or presentations. For example, I had a couple wineries that needed to do fairs virtually. So, communicate differently. And I was very lucky to be able to quickly jump into that wave and provide my clients solutions for these kind of like new problems that before were like, my website doesn't look that amazing, but I don't care. And I was like, okay, I need to stand out quickly. How do I do? Or I need to improve my SEO for my e-commerce. Like, let's do that. Yeah. So, so for the past years, it's been challenging. It's been crazy. It fluctuates. But I think that's what we all been going through all around the world. But yeah, it was an excellent opportunity for me to get deeper on this task of communicating wine and translating wine and getting it digital, actually.
Something that we spoke about kind of in our pre-chat as well, and I think it's something that, as you say, it's fascinating to hear you talk about it. It's like the pandemic brought all of these things to a head. I think many people had been sort of saying this for many, many years. I don't think it's a new idea. Certainly in other industries, and certainly this wasn't the first time that I think a lot of those wineries and regions had heard this. This is nothing new, but it was the pandemic that kind of forced people and became what we call a burning platform. It was like you absolutely have to do something now, or you may go out of business. It could have been that stark. So.
And it was not only like at the beginning, I was thinking like only wineries as a potential client or working with only wineries to consumer. That was like my first approach. But then I realized the world's like much bigger. You have the e-commerces trying to develop. You have both online bottle shops with natural wine, and you have people trying to develop low alcohol wines. And, there's a lot going on, and wine agencies and, the world of it is much bigger, and it's really, really interesting. I think that one of the interesting things about the pandemic is it's made us start thinking more out of the box and make us like feel more comfortable about this process of thinking out of the box. So, for example, like the wines that I brought in today for us to taste are Argentinian wines, but they are not Malbec and they are not from Mendoza. So I was thinking, okay, what do we people think probably think when they think of Argentina? And normally I thought, okay, you have very fruity red wines from a warm climate. You get a New World wine, and then they are like young and easy to drink, but probably not that much age-worthy. So I have brought three wines today that kind of to invite us all to think out of the box and see that there are other opportunities around there, and there's stuff going on in terms of diversity all across the board.
Yeah, I love it, and I think it's you hinted at that earlier when I brought up Malbec, and I was really intrigued by many different factors of these wines, the geography, the grapes, the color in particular with one of them. So just to sort of set the scene for anyone listening, Florencia has chosen 3 Argentinian wines, and I presume the order that we would taste them with would throw the door open to you to talk about the first wine, which is a Chardonnay.
Okay, yes. So before starting into this wine, I want to talk a little bit, or like quickly introduce Argentina for those listening that are not that familiar. So Argentina is a very large country in terms of size. So if you think, you can fit almost 5 Spains within Argentina. So Argentina has a very huge diversity of climate and a very huge diversity of soils. So what makes Argentina different from other wine producing countries is that we have a very continental climate. So let's take Mendoza, that is probably the easiest one. Mendoza is located in the center west of Argentina. And it has extremely continental dry weather. So if we think on the west, we have Chile on the other side, and we have a 6,000 meter wall between us. So any chance of humidity coming from the Pacific, it drops in the Andes as snow. So all we get is a warm wind and pretty much no precipitations. And then on the other side, we have the Atlantic, but that's about 12 hours drive or 10 hours drive. So the influence, we are very, very continental climate. What does it mean, really? So we have tons of sun. We have around 300 something days of sun per year. So it's barely clouded. It's very dry, around 300, 400 mils of rain per year. So millimeters, of rain per year. So that's pretty low, and means that grapes are super healthy. Then we have wind that brings freshness to the vines, and then altitude that makes nights much colder. So what's the kind of like the result? And then a lot of diversity of soils. And when you can combine these elements differently in different areas, you get a huge diversity of terroirs or sites, call it however you want. So here I brought, the first wine that I brought is, all 3 wines are from Grupo Peñaflor. That is, as I said, the largest wine group from Argentina. And they started this project called Costa y Pampa that is located in Buenos Aires. So it was around 2015. And they have developed this winery in charge by Ezequiel Ortego. And they have Pinot Noir, Albarino, and like also like different varieties, and they're trying to take it with a very innovative mind. So this wine for me, I wanted to bring it in, is a Chardonnay from Buenos Aires coast. And unlike most of Argentinian wines, it's not from altitude, it's not from sunny Mendoza, it's a cold climate, no, a 0 altitude or a couple meters of altitude from near the ocean. So really interesting thing.
And I think, it's fascinating hearing you talk. And I wonder, maybe as well, this is going to be new for me, certainly. Maybe talk a little bit about those conditions in Buenos Aires. in particular, because I think it's perhaps not so known as a grape growing region. Obviously, as a city and Tango, but not for its grapes.
So this is located on the south of Buenos Aires province. It is right near the ocean. It's a couple kilometers from the ocean, so very direct wind influence. So the climate is also much cooler in that sense. So the other difference that kind of makes the impact that has on wine is much lighter, fresher wines with a lot of like crispiness, and that's kind of like their signature and their goal. Whether it's the Chardonnay or the Pinot Noir or the Albarino, for instance. And the other difference is that their soils are, okay, and we're getting nerdy here, they have different type of soils compared to Mendoza. Soils in Mendoza are soils that are alluvional soils, and they have very different texture and different size of rocks and very poor soils. Yeah. While in Buenos Aires, they are loessic, meaning that they come from wind and they have wind erosion. So the particles are much finer. They're still rather, let's say, poor soils, but they have a little bit more of matter and they're like more fine-grained in the texture of the soil. And these vines particularly are quite young, I would say 2015, 16. But yeah, I think that would be the main difference to contrast, thinking this is a cool climate. It is Chardonnay. It has wind influence. It has sun as well. So you get to a nice ripeness, fruitiness, and the fruit tastes rather ripe in a sense, but you get the crispiness from the ocean. And I believe it's something super interesting to keep an eye on.
Absolutely, agree with what you're saying here. I'm certainly finding all of those components. And it's almost, it's certainly, for me, it's evolved over the last half an hour because, on the sort of first trying right out of the fridge, probably, slightly too cold, about half an hour ago, it was the fruit that I got, and it was kind of only the fruit. It was very, very fruit dominant. But retrying this now, it's cooled down a degree or two. It's got a little bit more air in there, and it's quite remarkable, really, how much it's changed, and actually how much more I'm feeling, and I'm noting that more saline characteristic coming through. That what people will often call as that sort of minerality, but it's really there and evident as that kind of more sort of salty aftertaste that I'm still getting now. A sort of 30 seconds or so after trying it.
Absolutely, and also there's a slightly textural element to it. It has some skin contact. I think it's pretty short, like 24 hours or something, but I think they've done a really good job highlighting the fruit, the freshness, and some like very refined complexity. And
I think what would be as well really interesting to talk about with this particular wine. I mean, again, I'm going to include direct links to all of the wines in the description below, so you can see the bottle and you can kind of learn a little bit more about them. But my impression of visiting their hashtag on Instagram and kind of looking at the bodega itself and looking at where this wine comes from was that they seem to be doing a good job of kind of drawing consumers closer and maybe making the whole experience of visiting a winery and trying these wines more accessible, maybe. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about that side of their business.
Well, I think that this is a large winery and they have multiple ends and they have large group of people working really hard to achieve like different size. They have from a research and development team for the vineyard to research teams for, and they play around a lot in the winery. They also have a marketing team that is fantastic, and they are all the time looking into trends and how to communicate. I think that in this way they've done something. This wine kind of falls into the winery Trapiche as a whole. That is kind of like probably more well known around the world. But they've made, I believe, a really good job making it in a classic looking kind of label, but at the same time that is appealing to younger consumers, texture labels, and a very interesting packaging. That is one of the main cues for millennials to buy wine. So I think that they got it right in that sense, and they have a great team of people working in multiple ends, and they're able to deliver in many levels. Then the next wine that we're going to try, it's an Old Vines Criolla done by El Esteco. We're flying now to Salta, that is in the northern part of Argentina. It's also, in terms of climate, it's much more similar to Mendoza because it's still sunny and dry and high altitude. But we're talking about some higher altitudes here. So for us to have an idea and compare, Mendoza is around between 600 and 1,300 meters above the sea level. That's kind of like the range of altitudes that we have in Mendoza. But in Cafayate, that is where this wine is from, in Salta, we're starting off 1,700 meters, and we can go all the way up 2,300. So we're talking about much higher altitude, much higher like sun radiation, and higher altitude, so larger diurnal range. So nights are quite chilly and fresh there. So on the one hand, you have enough sun to get very ripe, fruity grapes with a lot of extract and flavor and concentration. But at the same time, you get a lot of freshness and aromatics expressions. With this wine, my idea is to kind of like turn down a second myth that we often think of Argentina thinking we are a newer country, that we are. But for instance, this wine that we're trying right now is believed, they have some papers that date from 1958, I believe, but they think that it might be even older than that, these vineyards. So these are pergola vineyards with Criolla grapes. Criolla is a pretty interesting term because we call Criolla a lot of things. And Criollo means a mix between Native American and Spanish. So you can have Criolla music, you can have Criolla empanadas, you can have Criolla everything. And this is actually a group of large, it's a family of varieties that are named differently. It's known as País. In Argentina, it's Criolla Chica, it's called Cereza. In Bolivia and Peru, they call it also different. In California, they call it Mission, but we're talking about the same variety. And one of the theories believes that is that when the conquerors were coming to America, they would stop at Canary Island, and that they brought Listán Negro, that is one of the parents of the Criolla family, from Canary Islands, and brought the Listán Negro over. So that's one of the theories. But actually, most of the Criolla families, including as well Torrontés, that is part of that family, are crossovers between Torrontés de Alejandría and Listán Negro, or many other mix of varieties. But yeah, they arrived here very early in history. All the missionaries came in from Europe, brought them here, and they have them as part of their culture, and they rooted it very deeply in all over America. America being the continent. So, I thought it's a super interesting to present today. And this one particularly, it's Criolla coming from a 50 years old vineyard planted in pergola system in Salta at 1,700 meters above the sea level. So very strong vines, very deep rooted. They've done a fantastic job protecting them and revitalizing them and old vines often brings a lot of challenges. But the team at El Esteco, led by Alejandro Pepa, that is an amazing winemaker, one of the nicest people you would ever meet in the world of wine. And Ale and their team, they've made a fantastic job working with these vines.
Of the 3 bottles, this was the one that really stood out to me. As I mentioned earlier, it stood out to me when I poured it out today, just in terms of the color, the clarity, the brightness of the red wine as it sat in the glass and sits in the glass. But I even I guess got taken aback a little bit before opening. When the bottle arrived, I was able to sort of hold it up to the light and see, okay, this isn't going to be your classic, certainly not your kind of classic Malbec looking wine, but even and this will sort of lead into another question as that tends to happen. But because of that color, and I think very much the accessibility of the wine itself, it kind of, in a sense, it drinks how it looks as well. It is still quite refreshing. It's quite fruit forward. But it's kind of quite deep in flavor as well. I'm certainly getting some texture and this is not a simple wine by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm just wondering, has the way that influenced perhaps by wineries like El Esteco, has the handling of País changed over time? Because I can imagine in another sort of parallel universe that this could, in a sense, it could have been made into quite a rustic style, and that maybe here they're treading a little bit lightly with the winemaking. But that's my impression.
So for the people that is not looking at the wine at this moment, for you to know, it's a very pale red wine, almost looking like a rosé. It's very clear and light in the color, but if you take a look at it,
not a Provence rosé either,
not a Provence rosé. It's color, a deep rosé, but it has more the concentration of it. It looks more like a rosé than a red Malbec that you would think of. That's why we're talking about that. And because of that, so these criolla varieties, remember we were discussing that our production and our consumption in the 70s was up to 90 liters per capita. I think that today we're talking about, 10, 16, all of in average, I would say in the wine producing countries. That was huge. And of course, Argentina will have to produce a lot of wine. And these varieties were used for volume. They are, if you have a pergola, you can charge it with a lot of grapes. They can produce a lot of volume. And that kind of was the first goal at the beginning. But then as they started converting into more quality, caring more about the yields, converting from pergola to PSP, people start paying that much attention to it. And they would just use for blend, for other stuff. And then a couple years ago, a series of winemakers all over, I would say South America and even in the US, started realizing that the potential of this grape is fantastic. And you have vines, the ones that survived that era and were not ripped off to plant more Malbec or more Cabernet or whatever, they could produce a fantastic quality. So they've done a work trying to make them, in one hand, in the vineyard management, caring about the yields and the production and the irrigation. It's a complex matter in that sense. But then in the winery as well. For example, this particular wine has first a cold soak, then it goes whole berry to start fermenting. So it kind of has a slightly carbonic maceration at the beginning, but then at a certain point it's transferred out and it's fermented as a white. So it kind of has all this fruitiness and flavor and the depth of flavors that you were describing, combined with a lot of freshness and this appeal that invites you to drink the next glass. It's not it's light, it's seducing, it's not something heavy and bold.
Thinking about the occasion as well, I could imagine this being kind of served all year round, in a little bit of the way that I think, that maybe those more complex rosés can be. I think that they're super versatile, and they can see you all year round, and they can go with food, and they can be kind of had by themselves. And I just think it feels as though that's quite significant. It's like the world rediscovering this grape that is, probably one of the oldest ones in Argentina.
Yeah, and it's amazing in terms of the heritage, historic and cultural heritage that it brings, but it's also very linked to trends about consumers right now. I was reading an article the other day saying that, for example, millennials are more appealing or are more intrigued by light wines, not too tannic, and that can be paired with food. That's kind of like the one thing that millennials value in wine that is quite different of what previous generations were looking for, like in the Parker era. So I think that it's kind of working all together, and as the consumers are evolving, the winemakers are doing a great job, not only protecting this heritage, but delivering to the current needs.
Yeah. And is it your impression, therefore, that those winemakers and the ones who are behind this particular wine, that it is almost like a tango, or it is almost like a dance between them and the consumer, and that they're actually, following in a sense as well as leading? I
believe that that's a very smart way to see it. I think that today, being a wood winemaker doesn't mean only to have good technical knowledge or only understanding how to work in the winery. It requires a different amount of skill sets, and understanding the consumer is one of them. And I think that in this way, they are able to deliver this to a particular type of consumers that, if they are intrigued and curious about new stuff, this is amazing, an old vine from Argentina brought through Canary Island. I don't know. I find it really fascinating.
Well, this is it, and I think known for saying that a good wine is a time capsule of so many different things. Of the history, of the weather, of the people, of the kind of consumer tendencies at the time, and I think I'm really enjoying your descriptions here, and I think it kind of gives insight really into just how many stories there are within a wine like this, and I'm sure there are many more. I'm
for sure, but it's also like the kind of discussion that if you pour a glass like this, the kind of discussion and interaction that invites you to share culturally, it's a nice, it opens up a nice talk. And that's also like a great value for a wine to have, I believe. So the next wine we have, and the last wine, for not boring you guys all at home or making you feel jealous, it's a Cabernet Franc from Fincas Notables. It's also from El Esteco. We're going to stay in Salta again. Mm-hmm. But kind of my point here was that we often believe or see Argentina as value for money and something to be drunk young, because it's ready to drink. Malbec has the ability to be ready for drink very early. But this wine, I believe, it has everything to be enjoyed now, but you can age it for years and can turn out into something fantastic. So Cabernet Franc is planted all over Argentina, although it's not that much popular out of it. I think it's becoming slowly a thing. I think that we have the ability to deliver great varietal typicity, and you can get a lot of the elements that you would expect from a Cab Franc from Argentina. And one of the things I believe is it gets Argentina, with the altitude, achieves a perfume and an aromatic expression that adds an extra level to what Cab Franc is. So I believe that's one of one of the most beautiful things about our Cab Francs.
Yeah, I can only echo, I think, what you've said there. I think, again, just, interestingly for me, that this is the, that sort of Cabernet color, if you will. It's got that more sort of classic looking color, I would say, than the Criolla had. But absolutely, it's very much recognizable as a Cabernet Franc. I mean, and I think really just gonna repeat, I think, everything that you said there. I can definitely imagine this wine evolving over time, and it's in relatively young into its evolution, being a 2017. But I could see this just going on over time. Just evolving in terms of its complexity, in terms of its integration, and again, super interesting.
When we think about what makes a wine age-worthy, we got to consider, it needs to have the structure, the alcohol, the acidity, the tannins to evolve, but also the flavor concentration, the fruit density, and the aromatics. And I believe that this wine has all of it, and it's already well integrated. It has, this depth that can only get better, So, it was kind of like my point. It's made in a rather classical way, but it has tons of potential for aging. And next 10, 15 years, it will only get better.
Absolutely. And I'm super happy and super interested to have, I guess, taken that virtual tour around and to have brought the listener with us. And I think also,
sorry, I really wanted to also get some wines from Patagonia or wine from other provinces. There's stuff going on even in Mendoza that it's interesting to think out of the box and out of Malbec. The next time we can probably travel farther south and get more into like Chubut or like Patagonian wines. They're doing a lot of like innovative projects down there too. So really interesting stuff.
Absolutely. And I think this is, I think what, really, and I think we'll come on to talk about this a little bit more, but I think this is where digital communication really, I think, has just changed everything, because, I think, go back 20 years when, you pretty much, if you wanted to be visual to people, you had to be in decanter or you had to be on TV or, which of course have a huge cost entry. So you're gonna kind of almost focus on one or two stories, really, aren't you? You're not going to try to tell so many stories in that precious time that you have to actually interact with people. And it's my belief that since we're now, a lot more dispersed, I guess, in terms of the way that we can communicate, it feels as though there's just so much more bandwidth there to tell so many different stories in so many different ways, and they don't need to be necessarily competing against one another.
Yeah, and then I completely agree, and bearing in mind that you can adapt your stories, the same story, but you can tell and adapt it to the person that you have in front of you. And that's like the one, it's not the same story, it needs to be told on the same way. If you are talking to your importer, probably they would appreciate like key selling point, stuff that helps them to rotate the wine fast, and you have to train your sales force. That is a completely story. If you're talking a bunch of wine geeks somewhere that are interested about like Loessec soils, and then if you are presenting it to your consumer, probably they are more interested on like when to drink it or how to drink it or why they should recommend it to their peers. So keeping in mind that it's the same story, but it can be told in so many different ways to have a better impact.
Fascinating, and again, I think this is a topic that's very close to my heart. But I think, where I'd like to move the conversation to now, I think, obviously your consultancy and you spoke about the massive change that kind of happened in early 2020. I'm just curious though, as we kind of start to close out 2021 and kind of look forward to 2022. Looking back on the year, have you noticed any particular differences or particular trends coming out of the projects that you're being approached with now? Because
Yes.
presumably the people who were going to get online and needed to get online quickly, they've already done that. So what are maybe some of these trends that you're seeing now, which maybe we'll see coming through next year?
I think that one of the most interesting things is that we moved away from a stage where we're all wondering, like, how do we tackle millennials? With millennials, we were aliens, and wineries were discussing on what are millennials and what do we think. I think that we've passed, thanks God, that stage, and we are more into starting delivering and hearing to the consumers better. So I think that there are like a couple trends. One is related to sustainability, as everything else. Like just a quick fact for us to have in mind. So wine industry is in general rather sustainable. It's agriculture. It doesn't require that much chemicals compared to most of other agricultural practices. So in general, we are already a rather sustainable industry. When it comes to, for example, carbon emissions, a bottle of wine roughly produces around 1.2, 1.3 kilograms of CO2 per liter of wine. And out of that, 40% comes from packaging and 20% comes from transport. So if wineries focus on tackling that 60%, they can significantly reduce the carbon footprint. So I believe water usage is huge, regenerative agriculture, there are like so many other stuff. And the other 40% is kind of like split half-half between winemaking and viticulture. So there are a lot of practices that can be done, but focusing on packaging. Millennials are already interested and triggered about packaging and alternative packaging, and cans are growing massively in the US, in the UK, and consumers get a lot of benefit out of, like single servings. You're at home, you don't want to open a full bottle. You can get a can, it's recyclable. It has very little impact. Bag-in box, PET, there are like different elements that can start to rethink how we approach wine and how we sell wine, and how, as consumers, be less scared about trying new stuff. That's, for me, one of like the largest trends in terms of cans, bag-in-box, and the opportunity of the industry of reducing the carbon footprint by using alternative packaging. So that's one. Then the other one has to do with label transparency. Consumers are very much into understanding what they consume, and they want to know what's in their wine and how it's done. Is it vegan? Is it not? Like different elements that the industry is kind of discussing. We don't want to have like a label like a pack of cookies will have, but there are ways with technology, QR codes, that can make that easier for the consumer that wants to know. And closely tied to that, it's kind of like, and this is more looking on the long term, I think that cryptocurrency, blockchain, NFTs is going to play a major role in terms of transparency and what the consumers are going to be able to demand on their wines. So looking forward, I think that blockchain and NFT, like non-fungible tokens, are the new millennials. It's the thing that we know we have to conquer. We don't understand it yet, but eventually we're going to be able to get into this metaverse and deliver virtual tastings and deliver. There's going to be, I believe, like virtual influencers, like avatars that can tell you about wine. And probably it's not going to be a Parker anymore or somebody's points, but it's going to be an avatar telling you what are the trends. So that's another one. And the last one, I think it's related to health. People is trying to reduce their alcohol income. They're getting more interested in like lower alcohol, everything like from gin, spirits, like and wine falls into that category. And yes, having the chance of having a low alcohol wine that tastes like wine and delivers the cultural elements of wine it's another massive opportunity. It's growing in the state crazy, and I think it's like into 2024 they're expecting it to be around a $30 billion industry, only low alcohol, like or no alcohol wine. So huge trend in that end.
In my way of capturing all of those points that you're making there, I think a lot of it for me does really come back to transparency, because it's, even as far down as blockchain, it's like, actually having those records of where things have come from, the authenticity of it, that I think is related to transparency, having what's in, as simple as having what's in the bottle be what's on the label, and that label kind of telling you something, about the provenance and how it was made and where it came from and all of these things. And it
footprint
seems
as well. You can tell your consumers, okay, this bottle of wine, this is how much carbon it goes from your own personal budget, so there's huge potential on communication. And I think that like this new reality that we have, going digital, going virtual, metaverse, and getting deeper and deeper into it, it's a massive opportunity for communicating wine.
Super love the conversation, and to be honest with you, there's so much that I could ask you there and could sort of delve, but I may kind of leave that as a bit of an open topic, and of course we'll include your contact details below. So if there's anybody listening who I think wants to pick up that conversation and speak with you about that, then you have all the details that you need below to contact Florencia.
More than welcome.
Reason being is today I would like to, perhaps moving towards closing, kind of fully square the circle really, and start to bring in a little bit about that point that I guess drew you to me in the first place, which is being at the stage that you are with the Master of Wine program, and I just wonder if you wouldn't mind kind of almost making a connection back to those trends that you kind of just spoke about, because those trends are obviously quite at the cutting edge, and how does that sit with doing the Master of Wine, which is one of the kind of world's most prestigious and well regarded qualifications and kind of institutions, and are you finding the opportunity to bring out some of those cutting edge topics in the course?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the most valuable things for me about the Masters is that it teaches you how to think, and it really teaches you to learn differently and to approach stuff with a different curiosity and think about stuff with perspective. And I think that's one of the things I'm enjoying the most, and I can bring it into my work really easily. And I'm actually enjoying that side of it. It's, when we happen to learn, especially in like our traditional way of learning where we get everything into boxes. I remember I was listening, I don't know, when I was studying viticulture, I had my viticulture folder and I was studying that, and that went into my head somewhere and it's organized there. And then I have my winemaking stuff or my experience with consumer. So, our education system is pretty good on having things very well organized and divided and classified, and kind of, what I feel with the Master of Wine is like it took all my folders and like all my whole library down and mixed all the books that I have before. And then you find yourself thinking on how, I don't know, drought somewhere would influence the market demand somewhere else, and it gets you to connect stuff that probably you were not connecting before. And I for me, it is a privilege. It is an amazing opportunity, and it's a joy to have to spend the time learning about this and learning to think differently. And I'm extremely happy to be down this path.
I think what I've tended to ask through this series is really just to, kind of take us back a little bit in terms of the point you were at in your career and in your life just before making the decision to kind of start the Master of Wine. I think that's always struck me as a very interesting kind of transition, really, because seeing and looking and knowing how difficult it is and how many people fail, but yet still making that step. That moment is fascinating to me.
I don't believe that is like a one moment thing. For me, I remember very clearly the first time I came across the Masters of Wine, the institute, I didn't know what it was. I was one night when I was like probably 20 years old, Googling, when you're late at night, randomly looking for stuff, spending your time. And I was looking for masters to do in Europe. And I came across, I can picture this old website with green and a little bit purple. And I started reading wow, this is the highest you can study in wine. I remember getting a little bit, quite scared about, or quite amazed by the fact that somebody had to refer you. And my point back then was how am I going to meet the Master of Wine being here in my apartment? That was my first thought. And then it kind of stayed in the back of my mind. Obviously it went somewhere. But I kind of from then and with different experience, I kind of quickly realized that I didn't want to only focus on the winemaking side of things, that I wanted to understand the business and I wanted to understand quality and I wanted to understand communication. So I kind of developed my path to move into the Masters of Wine. And I was lucky enough to be able to work in a lab and work in quality control, work in exports and be a brand ambassador. So it kind of was a process of many years. This is a nice story. I think it was my first year at Peñaflor, I was 26, 27. My boss asked me to go with the Master of Wine, Madeleine Stengred, that is a loved friend, to go with her to Salta, to El Esteco, and it goes around here to go out visit the winery. She's been there many times, but I went with her. And that trip was kind of the one that being so close with her and chatting on the trip and everything, where I kind of saw and got fascinated on the way she thought, she thinks, the way she communicates. And that was that was when it came back. But then from that moment on till the moment that I decided to apply, it took me a huge personal process to believe that I could do it, because for me, it was an impossible thing to believe I would be accepted. And, we all have our stuff and confidence and understanding that we can do it. And we see it so high as a certification that it took me quite a long time to trust myself enough to say, okay, I can do it. And I went to a couple like introductory course where my mentor also pushed me into doing it, and Madeleine, and talking to masters of wine. And then, I applied in 2019. And they let me in. Hopefully they don't regret.
A huge thanks to you, Florencia, for being such a great guest. As you say, it was so cool to revisit Argentina, and I really feel like we're only scraping the surface. Do visit Flor's website, flor-gomez.com, where you can learn more about her project and find her main social media handles and email address. Please do help to amplify this great episode by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/474. And if you really enjoyed it, then do please leave the episode an iTunes review on the same link, which really helps people find Interpreting Wine. That brings the MW Student Series to a close for now. All that's left to say is a huge thank you to all the guests, Melissa, Victoria, Luke, and Florencia. And if you want to replay any of those episodes, you can find the direct links at the bottom of the description. And of course, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcasts on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.